Maya Garrett was 8 years old and had no idea that pointing at a paperweight would crack open 11 years of silence in 30 seconds. She did it the way she did most things, directly, without apology, with the particular confidence of a child who had not yet learned that some observations are inconvenient. She looked at the silver compass rose sitting on the corner of the executive's desk, looked up at the woman in the charcoal blazer, and said in the same voice she used to ask for more syrup on her waffles, "My dad has one of those. He keeps it in a wooden box in his bottom drawer. He takes it out sometimes when he thinks I'm asleep." Catherine Aldridge, managing partner of Aldridge Architecture Group, the woman who had restructured 3 failing firms before she was 32, stood very still. The compass rose was sterling silver, 3 inches across. Its 8 points were hand-filed, not cast, and the cardinal directions were marked not with letters, but with small, precise engravings. A cedar tree for north, a river bend for south, a rising sun for east, a bridge span for west. On the underside, in lettering too small to read without a magnifying glass, were 12 words, "For the work we haven't built yet. S.G. and T.G. Year 1. Catherine had been told, when Richard Brandt placed it on her desk 4 years ago the morning she signed the partnership documents, that only one existed. That the original founding partner had commissioned it and left it behind when he walked away from the firm. That it was a symbol of something she was now carrying forward. Thomas Garrett was standing in the hallway. He had come back for his daughter. He wore a gray inspection jacket with his name on the chest pocket and a clip badge from the City Building Authority, a smear of graphite on his left wrist, from notes he'd taken on the second floor. 48 years old, gray at the temples, steady-handed. A man who had spent years doing work that required precision and received none of the attention precision deserved. He found Maya first, the way he always found her first in any room. Then his eyes moved to the desk. He saw the compass rose. Catherine watched his face. Reading faces was the skill no one listed on a resume, but that separated the people who closed deals from the people who almost closed deals. What she saw was not surprise. It was recognition, and beneath it, the stillness of a man who had been waiting 11 years for a moment like this, and was not entirely sure he was ready for it, now that it had arrived. "Come on, Bug." Thomas held out his hand. "We're going downstairs." Maya looked at Catherine, then at her father, and went. At the door she turned back, the way she always did, because leaving a room without acknowledging the people in it felt rude in a way she couldn't articulate, but had felt since she was very small. "Sorry for interrupting," she said. "He has the same one, though. I wasn't making it up." The door closed. Catherine stood at her desk for a long moment. Then she picked up her phone, opened the building authority's contractor registry, and typed in the name from his badge. Thomas Garrett had been assigned to inspect the new east wing of the Aldridge building 3 weeks earlier by a supervisor who had no idea what the assignment meant, and a scheduling system that certainly didn't. He'd looked at the work order a long time before signing his initials in the box. Then he'd driven home, made Maya's lunch for the next day, and sat at the kitchen table until close to midnight, with his hands flat on the wood. He had known this building by its blueprints before it had a foundation. He'd drawn the original structural concept for the East Wing 11 years ago, on a Sunday afternoon at the kitchen table of the house he'd shared with Susan, while Maya slept in the next room, and Susan sat across from him with a red pen, marking the places where his math was elegant, and the places where it was merely correct. Susan Garrett had been an architect. Thomas was a structural engineer. Together, in the 4 years before Maya was born, and the 2 after, they'd built a small firm, 12 employees, a rented office above a dry cleaner on Weston Avenue, a reputation for taking on structural work other firms passed over. They'd named it Meridian Structural Design, after the compass rose they'd made together on their first anniversary, hand-filing the silver in Thomas's father's workshop, because they couldn't afford to have it cast, and didn't want to anyway. Richard Brandt came to them as an investor. In the beginning, he seemed like a man who recognized what other people had built and wanted to stand near it. He was 59 then, well-connected in the way that opened doors that stayed closed to firms above a dry cleaner, no matter their reputation. He offered capital and access. Thomas and Susan offered the work. The agreement was supposed to be a silent partnership. 18 months in, it was something else. Susan died in November of the third year, a gas leak in the office, on a Saturday when she'd gone in alone to finish a proposal. The fire marshal's report said accidental. Thomas read it 4 times, said nothing out loud, and kept reading it once a month for 2 years until he understood exactly what was wrong with the wording, and why. He'd been in a different hospital himself when it happened, a collapsed scaffolding on a job site, 3 broken ribs, a concussion that left him disoriented for 6 weeks. He wasn't there. He couldn't say clearly and immediately what the terms of the partnership actually were. By the time he could, Richard Brandt had the firm's assets folded into a new entity. The Aldridge Architecture Group, named for the street where Richard's father had grown up, a detail Thomas learned later and found almost unbearable in its smallness. Along with a transfer document bearing a signature that was very close to his own. Thomas spent 18 months trying to prove it was a forgery. And another year, understanding why he couldn't prove it without the original partnership minutes from the March meeting, where he and Susan had formally voted against Richard's proposed restructuring. Without that vote on record, the transfer looked voluntary. With it, it looked like what it was. The minutes were in the firm's archive. The archive was now on the 14th floor of the Aldridge building, in a records room whose location he'd spent 3 weeks of inspection work quietly learning. He had 11 more days left on his contract. Maya went to Lincoln Elementary, and on Wednesdays the school ran a half-day schedule Thomas had never fully reconciled with his own. His neighbor, Mrs. Cho, usually watched her. This Wednesday, Mrs. Cho's daughter was visiting from out of town, so Thomas brought Maya to the job site with instructions to bring something quiet to do and not touch anything electrical. She'd brought a sketch pad, colored pencils, and a chapter book about a girl who solved geological mysteries, a library book she'd chosen herself, which Thomas had noted with quiet pride. She spent 2 hours in the ground floor lobby, drawing a floor plan of their apartment from memory. The crack above the bathroom door, the kitchen window that wouldn't close all the way. The corner of the living room, where the afternoon light came in at the angle that made the floor look like honey. At noon, she found him on the 2nd floor and asked if she could walk around. He said yes. Stay on floors 2 through 4, don't open any door marked with a red stripe. Come find him if anyone asks what she's doing. At 12:17, by the elevator log Catherine's assistant would pull. Later that afternoon, Maya pressed the button for the executive floor. The doors opened onto the carpeted quiet of the senior partner suites. She walked to the end of the hall and found a door that was open. She looked at a silver compass rose on a desk and said the thing that changed everything. Catherine did not call building security. She thought about it for about 40 seconds, then decided that a man who'd spent 3 weeks on legitimate inspection work under a contractor's badge was not the kind of problem security handled. Within the hour, she had his full file. City Building Authority, 12 years of inspection work, not a single violation. Before that, and this part she had to dig for, because it had been carefully obscured, a structural engineer at a firm called Meridian Structural Design, dissolved 11 years ago following the death of a founding partner. Susan Garrett, née Park, age 34, died in a gas leak fire at the firm's office a Saturday in November. Catherine read the obituary twice. She read the fire marshal's report, pulled through a city records portal that took 40 minutes to navigate. She read the transfer document that had dissolved Meridian and moved its assets, contracts, and intellectual property to the newly formed Aldridge Architecture Group, signed by Richard Brandt and Thomas Garrett. witnessed by a paralegal who'd worked exclusively in Richard's personal legal office for 20 years and retired 8 months after the document was dated. She looked at the compass rose. She opened the locked bottom drawer of her desk and took out the folder Richard had given her 4 years earlier, the morning she signed the partnership agreement. Richard was in assisted living now, the kind that cost more per month than most people earned in a year, and kept a careful distance from the outside world. He'd been declining cognitively for 2 years. His attorney managed his affairs. Inside the folder was a letter. She'd read it twice when he gave it to her, then put it away because its tone made her uncomfortable in a way she hadn't wanted to examine. She read it again now. The Compass Rose belonged to the firm's original founder, who chose to step away after a personal loss made the work impossible to continue. It is a symbol of a vision he could not carry forward. You are carrying it forward now. Honor what it represents. She sat with that for a long time. Outside, the city moved at its usual indifferent pace. Somewhere below her, a structural engineer in a gray inspection jacket was finishing his notes on the second floor, and his 8-year-old daughter was probably drawing something careful and attentive in a sketch pad. Catherine found the building authority's direct line and got Thomas Garrett's personal number. Then she texted him from her own phone. I need to speak with you. Not in any official capacity. I'd like to understand something. Would you be willing to meet? Thomas read the message sitting in his truck in the parking structure. Maya was asleep in the back seat, the way she went out sometimes on the drive home. Fast. All at once, like a light switched off. Her chapter book lay open on her chest. He'd been waiting 11 years for something like this. He just hadn't expected it to come from this direction. He'd expected it to come from the archive on the 14th floor, which he still needed 4 more days to reach. He forwarded the message to Daniel Cho, who wasn't a lawyer but was married to one, and who was the only person besides Maya's pediatrician who knew Thomas's full history and had simply decided, unasked, to be available when Thomas needed someone to be. She found something, Thomas typed, or part of it. Daniel called back in 3 minutes. How much does she know? Enough to ask. Do you have the archive files yet? No, 4 more days. Then you wait. You go in with the full record or you go in with nothing. Don't let her set the pace. Thomas looked at the message. He looked at Maya, her book rising and falling with her breathing. He thought about the 14th floor, the records room, the narrow maintenance corridor behind the archive's east wall. He'd spent 3 weeks learning this building the way he'd spent his whole career learning buildings. Not the surfaces, but the skeleton. Tomorrow evening he texted Catherine. There's a diner on Marshall Street, 2 blocks west of the building. 7 o'clock. Come alone. He got the archive files Thursday night. 47 minutes in the maintenance corridor. A penlight clenched between his teeth. A portable drive he'd bought with cash. He knew exactly which cabinet, which drawer, which backup subdirectory, because he'd designed Meridian's original filing system himself. And Richard Brandt had never bothered to reorganize it when he moved everything to the new building. It was the kind of detail that only made sense later. A man who steals something rarely understands it well enough to change how it's kept. He sent the files to Daniel at midnight. Daniel's wife, Elena, a litigator of 16 years looking at this as a favor to her husband, was reading the March partnership minutes before sunrise. She called at 6. The vote is there, March 14th. Thomas and Susan Garrett, co-founders, both against Richard Brandt's proposed asset restructuring, objection documented. The transfer 4 months later required both co-founders' consent. Susan was dead, which means it needed your documented consent, and the signature on that document doesn't match your signature on the original partnership agreement in at least 6 places. I've already called a forensic document examiner. Preliminary analysis in 48 hours. Thomas stood in the kitchen. Maya was still asleep. Early light was coming through the window over the sink. "What does this mean?" he said. "It means the transfer was fraudulent. Meridian was never legally dissolved. The assets that became Aldridge Architecture Group were never legitimately transferred." She paused. "It also means the woman running that firm bought into it in good faith, on the strength of fraudulent documentation. That matters for how this proceeds." Thomas was quiet. "What do you want out of this?" Elena asked, a direct question, the way direct people ask them, not a challenge, a tool. He'd thought about it for 11 years, the way you think about a structural problem you can't fix yet. Not obsessively, but steadily, checking it now and then to be sure you still understand its dimensions. "I want the record corrected," he said. "I want what happened to Susan documented accurately. She drafted the original design concept for everything that became that firm's signature work. The building on Crescent that won the regional award, that was hers. The structural language on the Whitmore project, the one that became the template for everything after, hers. None of it carries her name. And the firm itself. I'm opening my own practice. 3 people, real work, my name on the door. I've been building toward it for 2 years." He looked out the window. "I don't want a firm that was built on top of what happened to her." Catherine arrived at the diner at 6:54, in a dark coat over a dark blouse. Hair down, a different arrangement of the same person Thomas had only seen inside an office. He was still in the inspection jacket he'd worn all day. Maya sat in the corner booth with her sketchpad and a hot chocolate the server had overtopped with whipped cream. Headphones on, she was drawing an architectural cross-section of an imaginary building, with structural notations in the margins she'd picked up from watching her father work. Catherine sat across from Thomas and set 2 photographs on the table. The original Meridian Partnership Certificate and the transfer document. "The signature on the transfer," she said. "It isn't the one on the certificate." "No," Thomas said. "Richard told me the original founder chose to leave, that the Compass Rose was left behind voluntarily. I was in a hospital bed when my wife's office burned. By the time I was coherent, Richard had a version of events that was easier to support than the truth." He wrapped both hands around his coffee. He was 59. He had relationships with the city planning office, the zoning board, 3 law firms. "I was 37, with a concussion and a 3-year-old, and I'd just buried my wife." Catherine was quiet. "Victor Hale was Richard's attorney," Thomas said. "He drafted the transfer. He retired 8 months after it was signed and died 2 years ago. The paralegal who witnessed the signature worked exclusively in Richard's personal legal office for 20 years. He paused. "Richard's still alive, in memory care. His attorney's been managing the story for 11 years. "The March 14th board minutes," Catherine said. "I've been trying to find them. My copy is missing pages 4 and 5, and the remaining pages have a footer inconsistency I noticed about 6 months ago and didn't know what to do with." Thomas looked up. "I found it preparing the firm's history for our anniversary publication. I asked Richard's attorney about it and was told the originals were damaged in a move. I accepted that." She paused. "I shouldn't have." The silence between them had the quality of 2 people, arriving at the same understanding at the same moment. "I bought into this firm in good faith," Catherine said. "Not a defense, a fact stated plainly." "I know you did," Thomas said. She looked at him. It wasn't what she'd expected. She'd expected the controlled anger of someone who'd learned to carry a grievance efficiently, the kind that shapes every sentence. There was none of that in his face. "Susan and I used to argue about whether the work mattered more than the credit," he said. "She said the work did, that the buildings would stand regardless of whose name was on them. I thought she was right and braver than I was." He was quiet a moment. "I want her name in the founding record. She wrote the original design philosophy this firm has built on for 11 years, on a legal pad over 2 evenings, with Maya in an infant seat on the kitchen table. I still have the pads." Catherine set both palms flat on the table and looked at him steadily. "What do you need from me?" 6 days. My attorney's preparing the filing. The document examiner needs 48 hours. When it's done, you'll have everything to bring to the full partnership board yourself. You present it. You control the process. You can defend it better than I can. And after? I leave the firm alone. I take my practice, I take the credit correction, and I go build things with my own name on them. He looked at her directly. What happens to Richard's estate and the restitution? That's separate. My attorney handles that. I don't need you for it. Catherine didn't wait for the filing to finish before she acted. 3 days later, on a Tuesday morning, she called an emergency meeting of the full partnership board, sending the notice herself, not through her assistant. She froze all archive and document assets pending legal review, and changed the access credentials on the firm's record systems, handing the new ones only to herself and the general counsel who joined 2 years ago and owed Richard Brandt nothing. Richard's attorney arrived at her office Monday afternoon with a prepared statement, an expensive suit, and the easy manner of a man who'd spent decades managing inconvenient situations. "You're moving on incomplete information," he said. "Thomas Garrett has a history of making claims he can't support. After Susan's death, he wasn't stable for a period. There are records that would concern a board." "What records?" Catherine said. He set a folder on her desk. She didn't open it. "I'm holding a board meeting tomorrow morning," she said. "I'd suggest you have whatever documentation you believe is relevant in hand by then. Our general counsel will review anything submitted through appropriate channels." He looked at her for a moment. 61 years old, 4 decades of being the person in the room who knew more than everyone else in it. She was 36 and had spent 14 years learning to be comfortable being underestimated. "Eleanor," he began. "Catherine," she said, "and I think we're done for today." He left. She watched his car pull out of the parking bay and felt, mostly, clarity, the feeling she trusted most. Elena Cho walked into the partnership board meeting Tuesday morning with a bound portfolio, and, as Maya would later describe it, secondhand from Elena herself, the manner of a person who has already won and is just being polite about it. The portfolio held the original Meridian Partnership Certificate, the March 14th minutes in full, forensic analysis of the signature discrepancy, and the 14 months of correspondence between Richard Brandt and Victor Hale before Susan's death. The last document in the chain was an email from Richard's private account, sent 3 days before the fire, to a number tied to a private contracting firm dissolved 6 months after Susan died. It read, "The situation at Weston Avenue needs to resolve before the March restructuring expires. Handle this week." Thomas wasn't in the boardroom. He was in the parking structure with Maya, who was drawing fish on the back of an inspection form, while he sat on the tailgate of his truck, looking at nothing in particular. Elena called at 11:40. He listened, said very little. When the call ended, he sat for another minute. "Are we going home?" Maya asked, without looking up from her fish. "In a bit." Did it work? He thought about the question the way it deserved to be thought about. "Yes," he said. "It worked." Maya nodded, satisfied, and added a fin to the largest fish. 3 weeks later, the Aldridge Architecture Group's firm history page was updated for the first time in 7 years. A new section appeared between the founding date and the first awarded contract. Meridian Structural Design, the firm whose work forms the foundation of Aldridge Architecture Group's design philosophy, was co-founded by Thomas Garrett and Susan Garrett, née Park. The structural language and design methodology, developed by Susan Garrett during Meridian's operational period, including the load distribution approach used in the firm's early commissions, is recognized as foundational to the firm's practice. Her contribution is documented in the firm's historical record effective this date. Thomas saw it on a Saturday morning while Maya was in the bath. He sat in the hallway outside the door, back against the wall, the way he always sat when he was waiting for her, and the door was closed. He read it twice, set his phone face down on the floor, and stayed there a while. Through the door, he could hear Maya narrating something to the shampoo bottles. A story about a character named Professor Compass, an explorer of underwater caves, that she'd been developing for about 2 weeks. He'd become invested in it the way he became invested in everything she made, fully, without reservation, in a way that didn't require her to know about it. 4 weeks after the board meeting, on a Friday evening, there was a knock at the apartment door. Maya answered it before Thomas could get out of the kitchen. She always answered first, on the grounds that she was faster and more curious, and came back holding a small paper bag from the bakery on Grant Street, wearing the expression of someone very pleased with a development, but trying to look as though she'd expected it all along. "It's the lady from the building," she said. "She brought something." Catherine stood in the doorway in a coat Thomas hadn't seen before, lighter gray, hair down. She handed the bag to Maya. "Maya told me 2 weeks ago, when we ran into each other at the permit office, that you make good pasta," Catherine said. "I told her that was a strong claim. She said strong claims required verification." Thomas looked at his daughter. Maya spread both hands. "There's lemon cake in the bag," Catherine said. "I didn't want to come empty-handed." "Come in," Thomas said, stepping back. "There's room at the table." Maya took Catherine by the hand and led her to the kitchen window to introduce the herbs on the sill: basil, thyme, a rosemary plant that had survived against Thomas's expectations, and a small cactus named Gerald, who was not, strictly, a cooking herb, but lived there anyway. Catherine asked about each one with the focused attention of someone who'd understood that the things people grow on windowsills are never really about the plants. Thomas went back to the stove and listened to Maya deliver Gerald's full biography, personality, preferences, his complicated relationship with direct sunlight, and to Catherine ask, gravely, whether Gerald had friends. Maya said yes firmly and began describing Gerald's social circle: 2 succulents on another sill and a spider plant she'd decided was, in character, much more outgoing. He didn't notice he was smiling until the pasta water boiled over. They ate at the kitchen table with the window cracked, the Friday evening coming in at a manageable volume. The pasta was good, and Thomas, who could admit, privately, when something he'd made well was in fact good, took quiet satisfaction in it. Catherine said it was excellent, said it once, and didn't over-elaborate, which he noted and appreciated. Maya ate more than she usually did on a Friday. Thomas had long since noticed she always ate better with someone else at the table, and had always felt half glad and half sad about that, in more or less equal measure. After dinner, Maya cut the lemon cake with enormous ceremony, narrating each slice like a sporting event, and declared it the best cake of her personal experience, which, she noted, covered a lot of years. "How many years?" Catherine asked. 8, Maya said, almost 8.5. "That's a significant sample size," Catherine agreed, and Maya looked extremely satisfied. When Maya was in bed, rabbit under one arm, 1 foot free of the blanket the way she always slept, chapter book on the nightstand for morning, Thomas walked Catherine to the door. She paused, looked at her own right hand. She wasn't wearing the compass rose. "I gave it back," she said. "Sent it to Elena's office. She said it should go to you." Thomas looked at his hand, empty. "You didn't have to do that." "I know." She looked up. "But carrying something that isn't yours is heavier than it looks. I've learned that a few times over, this past month." They said good night. He stood in the open doorway after she'd gone, the hall light buzzing the way it had for 6. The landlord contacted twice, the bulb never changed. A sound Thomas had stopped noticing the way you stop noticing what a building does once you understand its structure. He checked on Maya, breathing slow, foot out, rabbit secured, and stood in her doorway a moment in the dark. He thought about Susan, who'd named the firm Meridian because a meridian was the line from where you were to where you were going, and because she thought that was what good structural work really was. Not the building itself, but the line between the idea and the thing that stood. He thought about the legal pads in the closet, her handwriting crowding the margins of his calculations, the small birds she used to draw in the corners of documents when she was thinking. He thought about Maya, who had pointed at a silver compass rose and said the simplest possible thing, "My dad has one of those," and in doing so had walked straight into the gap between an 11-year story and the truth that had been living quietly inside it. On his dresser sat the wooden box, open now. He'd taken the compass rose out earlier and set it on top, where the morning light would find it. 8 points, hand-filed, a river bend, a rising sun, a bridge span. For the work we haven't built yet. He turned off the hall light and went to bed. Outside, the city settled into its late register, and somewhere on the other side of it, a building shaped by Susan Garrett's thinking stood dark, doing the quiet work buildings do when no one's watching, holding the weight, distributing the load, standing. Maya slept with her rabbit and 1 foot free. She didn't know what she'd started. She was 8 years old. She'd looked at a silver object on a desk and said what she saw, the way she always said what she saw, without stopping to calculate whether the timing was right or the room was ready. But that was how it happened, sometimes. Not through lawyers, not through filings, not through 47 minutes in a maintenance corridor with a penlight and a portable drive. Though those things mattered, and Thomas would be the first to say so. Sometimes it started with a child in a doorway who hadn't yet learned which observations were inconvenient. Sometimes it started with, "My dad has one of those." And the room went still. And an 11-year silence cracked open along the line where the truth had been waiting all along.